I am Dr. Amy Miracle. I'm a research scientist in the Alcohol Research Group at the Public Health Institute in Northern California. I co-lead the I-STARR project with Dr. Carmen Masson, who is a professor of psychiatry in the School of Medicine at UCSF. And there are a number of really talented folks who work on the project with us. And you'll hear from all of them during this webinar today. So co-investigators on the project include Sarah Zemore and Lenny Jason. Dr. Zemore is a senior scientist in the Alcohol Research Group at the Public Health Institute, and Dr. Jason is a professor of psychology and the director of the Center for Community Research at DePaul University. The project team also includes two biostatisticians, Drs. Meena Subbaraman and Libo Lee, as well as a project coordinator, Adrian Faxio, and two communication specialists, Diane Schmidt and Dustin Kebzu. So now that I've introduced myself and the team, please feel free to introduce yourselves by listing your name and your organizational affiliation in the chat. In fact, we'd like to know a little bit more about everyone who is participating in this webinar. So next slide, please. We're hoping that folks will participate in a quick Zoom poll. There are two questions in this poll. The first is about how you would describe yourself as it pertains to the topic of recovery housing for persons prescribed medications for opioid use disorders, which I'll shorthand throughout this presentation as MOUD. We're also hoping that we can learn about how you found out about today's webinar in this poll. And finally, we're also hoping that we can gain one more piece of important information, and that's how or what folks are hoping to learn from today's webinar. And we didn't put this in the poll because we wanted to hear from you in your own words. So please feel free to drop this information into the chat. In fact, we're really hoping that folks will be using the chat function throughout the webinar to communicate with the team and to ask us questions, but also to communicate with one another. We'll have someone on this end monitoring the chat. Thank you, Diane, so that we can make sure your questions are answered and that we're covering everything that you're hoping to hear about today. So Adrian started the poll and we'll close it out once we kind of get a critical mass here. I like what I'm seeing in the chat already, guys. How are we doing on the poll, Adrian?
We're at 68%. I think we can give it maybe half a minute for the last bit. Okay, we're at 71%. I'm gonna end the poll now and share the results.
Okay, so it looks like we have a number of folks who are professors or educators. We have some treatment providers. We have recovery and recovery housing advocates and some other stakeholders as well. So I should look at the chat to see how folks are identifying. How did you hear about the I-STARR webinar? So mostly from colleagues, so word of mouth and some other way. Interesting. So if folks want to, who responded as other stakeholder or in some other way, want to put some more information in the chat, that might be helpful for us as we're thinking about how to make sure that we get a diverse group of folks at this webinar and make sure that people hear about it. So why don't we go to the next slide, please? So, and briefly looking through the chat at kind of what people are wanting to hear about, I see some folks wanting to hear about the pilot studies, to hear more about serving this clients or residents who are taking MOUD in their houses. And so you've arrived at the right place. I hope that we answer all of those questions and more. And to start thinking about how we want to address those questions, I can start off with the aims of the project. Now, because of the type of award, this is an R24, these aims are slightly different than most NIH-funded research awards that you might be familiar with or might have participated with or in. So as this slide highlights, there are 3 aims to the I-STARR project. The first aim focuses on network development. For this aim, we want to connect diverse stakeholders who are dedicated to expanding access to recovery housing for persons prescribed MOUD and conducting research on it. So the second aim centers on creating recovery housing research infrastructure. So for this aim, we want to develop recovery housing that is equipped to support residents who are prescribed MOUD and to participate in effectiveness research. We also want to train researchers to conduct that work. And finally, our third aim focuses on providing research resources. So for this aim, we want to provide opportunities for junior investigators, as well as those who may be new to recovery housing research, the opportunity to collaborate with recovery housing researchers so that we can expand the evidence base on recovery housing for persons prescribed MOUD. And to tell you a little bit more about how I-STARR fits into other ongoing NIH research, I want to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Carmen Masson. Next slide, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carmen Masson. As Amy discussed earlier, I'm the co-principal investigator of the I-STARR project. The I-STARR project is situated within the Consortium on Addiction Recovery Science, or CEUs. And the mission of the CEUs network is to accelerate science on recovery support services for opioid and other substance use disorders by building an infrastructure based on scientific, lived experience, and community program expertise and resources. There are 5 existing grantees, and so this network comprises of the 5 existing grantees who have developed multi-stakeholder networks to advance the development of effectiveness research on specific types of recovery housing, especially for individuals who are taking medications for opioid use disorder. And these include the Advancing the Science on Recovery Community Centers, the JEEP initiative, which focuses on peer supports for justice-involved young adults, the FIRST Research Network, which has its focus on family-based peer supports, the STARS Network, which focuses on recovery support services in rural settings, and finally, the Innovations and Recovery through Infrastructure Support. There are 3 new grantees, of which we are one. And with respect to the CEUs aims and activities, the CEUs network seeks to coordinate varied research and training efforts across the 8 funded projects. And it creates communication and dissemination channels for the activities of these individual projects. So this goal is achieved by hosting an annual meeting that's focused on recovery support services. And the CEUs network will also, I try to identify other opportunities to sustain the CEUs collaborative activities after NIH funding ends. Another goal of the network is to have network members collaborate to offer training and peer learning to foster interactions among trainees at all stages, from undergraduates through early career scientists and those who are working in the field, including community members. So the CEUs network seeks to create toolkits to engage more persons with lived experience as recovery support services researchers and partners. And it also aims to increase the racial ethnic diversity in CEUs activities and has its focus on disparities also in addiction recovery support services. The Helping to End Addiction Long-Term Initiative, or the HEAL initiative, is the NIH initiative that is supporting all of these grants, and our I-STARR project aligns very well with the goals of the HEAL initiative, which is to improve prevention and treatment strategies for opioid misuse and addiction, and to enhance pain management. So that's the goal of the Helping to Heal initiative, Helping to End Addiction Long-Term Initiative. Thank you. Next slide, please.
That was great, Carmen. Thank you for providing that context. It's really nice to know that not only are we working on developing a network with the I-STARR project, but the I-STARR project is embedded within a larger network as well. It's a really exciting time to be studying recovery support services. So before we talk about the nuts and bolts and activities of the I-STARR project, I just want to give a little background on why we're focusing on developing recovery housing research infrastructure for persons prescribed MOUD. So to do so, members of the communications team turned to some leaders in the field. And we were specifically hoping that they would speak to why recovery housing is important to those in recovery from opioid use disorders, the challenges individuals who are taking MOUD face when they're looking for recovery housing, as well as the challenges individuals who are providers of recovery housing face in meeting their needs. And also the role that research plays in addressing these challenges and some of the challenges new researchers to the field might face in conducting this research. So with that, I want to turn things over to Dustin to show a quick video of our stakeholders.
Recovery housing is important to anybody with substance use disorder. Those that suffer from opioid use disorder, it can be, it can be deadly. Unlike some of the other substances that, people are, treated for, as we know, this can very much be a one and done situation.
So for those with opioid use disorders, who are looking for a place that's stable, where people are not using, where people are hopefully employed, learning skills, trying to change their life. This is so very important for our world and for the present difficulties that are being faced, particularly in this country.
Recovery housing is important for those people that are in, chronic relapse situations and have tried a variety of other ways to, to achieve abstinence or sobriety and get into recovery and have been unable. And recovery housing provides, the opportunity for those people that have this very serious, potentially, fatal situation, to be addressed. So I think recovery housing is critical for this particular population.
So individuals who have the stigma of a substance use disorder, who have the stigma of having an opioid use disorder, these individuals are often marginalized. So in a recovery house, you really have a group of people who basically are rooting for you, who are providing you opportunities, who are providing you someone who's a mentor, who's been more successful, has more clean time. And for individuals who are at risk of, all the problems that deal with housing insecurity, economic insecurity, recovery homes provide a stable place where people can begin that transition process back to the community.
Unfortunately, not everybody is equipped to be able to, serve those that have, needs for medication, from opioid use disorder.
There are still many individuals in our society who consider, if they're taking things like methadone, Suboxone, and other substances like that, called MATs, they think of them as, well, these are people that are still reliant on kind of drugs. So, some types of self-help groups, some recovery houses have still not realized that this is a very important part of recovery. Often people, when they have usage of an MAT like methadone, there's people that are reluctant to give them kind of a second chance, kind of a bed in a recovery home, or kind of to listen to them without skepticism. So what we need is really to take away the stigma.
We need to have data that supports the need for greater capacity, additional resources, appropriate training, and research provides us with the ability to tell that story in a way that the various stakeholders in this situation need to hear and able to support what they're able to do.
We need to have more information about, for example, how many people are using these types of medication-assisted treatments in recovery homes. What are their characteristics?
What are the barriers to people using MOUD in the recovery homes? Why aren't they letting it in if they're not letting it in? For the places that are doing it, what are they doing right that makes it comfortable and easy for people who are using MOUD to go to those homes? What are the incentives, right? How can we actually change this pattern if they're not offering it? How can we learn from the places that are doing so? What kinds of incentives need to be in place? Is this continuing education? Is this something from the state? Is it part of the licensing? Are there other things that can help? The first thing is really getting a lay of the land, because it's different than what we think of as treatment. I think they're often confused with residential treatment, where you may actually be getting treatment, and maybe I'm confused on that also. There's a big range, but what does this mean? What does this look like? Are there services there? Do people pay rent? What's the expectation for living there, for working, for having family, for having outside activities, for going to meetings? The second thing I would say, which is always my question, is what kinds of data are available? How do we know what we know about these houses? It may be that the data aren't available and we need to go and do qualitative work, our primary data collection, to really obtain that.
We're in a field that research is scarce, and people need information. They need data to be able to make the decisions and provide the support and the resources that we desperately need. So this work is monumental.
Wow. A huge thank you to Daryl Mitchell and Drs. Reif and Jason for sharing their insights with us. And thank you to the communications team for pulling all those voices together so nicely in this video. So some key takeaways from these different stakeholders about why the I-STARR project is important. So we heard that first, recovery housing is important to those in recovery, but it may be especially important to those in recovery from opioid use disorders because of the pharmacological properties of opioids. Medications have been developed to address the physiological changes introduced by opioid dependence by reducing or eliminating withdrawal symptoms, or by blunting or blocking the effects of illicit opioids. But challenges exist for those seeking recovery housing who are taking MOUD as part of their recovery, and for those providing support to them in the context of recovery housing. And we also heard that research is critical to addressing these challenges, and we need more, but those new to the field may face challenges in conducting this research. And so that's where we really hope that the I-STARR project comes in. So let me just talk a little bit about the components of the I-STARR project and how we'll address those challenges. So the I-STARR project has 3 components supporting the aims of the project. The project has a networking and communications component, a seminar series component with specific trainings for recovery housing providers and researchers, and a pilot studies component to support early stage researchers and researchers new to recovery housing in conducting the work that will lead to larger NIH funded research generating an evidence base on recovery housing for those prescribed MOUD. So to talk more about our networking and communications activities, I want to hand things off to my colleagues, Diane Schmidt and Carmen Masson. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Amy. So I'm Diane Schmidt, communication specialist on the I-STARR project. And just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the activities that we've been working on and will be developing over the course of the next few months as well. So to build and provide networking opportunities, we've developed a website, which you can find at istarr.arg.org. We really welcome you to check it out. And there you'll find information on our webinar series, information on how to register for the webinars, what the webinars contain, what the information is that will be provided. You'll also find information on our pilot studies program, including key dates, and that information will be updated as new funding becomes available as well. We also have a resources page that will include these webinars. So we will be, as Amy mentioned, recording the webinars, providing them on our website for people to watch after the fact. And then as well, we'll be building an intranet. So that's not in place yet, but that is in the works. And that space will be available for people to be able to log in. It'll provide more interaction and networking capabilities, as well as posting all the series there as well, so that you can watch the series as a whole. So look for that coming soon. And then to keep you informed on what's happening within the project, as well as upcoming training series and more information on the pilot studies, we'll be sending out a newsletter every quarter. So if you haven't signed up for that, really welcome you to, and you can do that again through the website at istarr.arg.org. And then again, we'll be connecting with folks via social media on our social media platforms. So make sure that you follow us, and we'll make sure that we also tag you as well. Now I'm going to turn it over to Carmen, who will speak to other dissemination activities and to introduce our advisory board.
Thanks, Diane. So the I-STARR project aims will be achieved through other activities, such as the webinars and other dissemination activities. So we will be providing a webinar series with specific tracks for operators or providers of recovery housing. We'll also be providing a track for researchers new to the field or other researchers who have been working in the addictions field but are new to recovery housing research. The other dissemination activities that the project will be involved in is presenting the progress and findings of the I-STARR project at academic and professional conferences annually, and will also be the principal investigators and other team members will be writing papers to be published in scholarly journals. We also, with our project, draw from an exceptional group of advisory board members, which include recovery and housing leaders, treatment providers and payers, national policy advocates, researchers and educators. And we're fortunate to be working with such an accomplished group of leaders in the addictions treatment and research field. And we strive to include diverse stakeholders in our infrastructure building activities. Next slide, please. So we are working with recovery and recovery housing leaders. For example, Kathleen Gibson, who's the CEO of Oxford House, Daniel Mitchell, who's the Vice President of Recovery Communities and the Executive Director of Progress House, Dave Sheridan, who's the Executive Director of the National Association for Recovery Residences, Ronald Tannenbaum, who's the co-founder and CEO and president of In the Rooms. Next slide, please. Then we have our treatment providers and payers who are represented. Hillary Kunins. Dr. Kunins is the director of the San Francisco Department of Public Health and Behavioral Health Services and Mental Health. Ronald Lamb, who's the deputy commissioner, retired now, of Planning Innovations at the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services. Nguyen No, who's an executive director of Hazelden Betty Ford Butler Center for Research. Dr. Andy Tompkins, who's the division director at Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital in the Division of Substance Abuse and Addiction Medicine. Next slide, please. We also have national policy advocates who are represented here. Patricia Clay, who is the executive director of Treatment Communities of America. Anna Pagano, who's the senior director of science at the American Society for Addiction Medicine. Mark Perino, who's the president of the American Association for the Treatment of Opioid Dependence. Aaron Williams, who's the senior advisor at the National Council for Mental Wellbeing. Next slide, please. And we're also working with researchers and educators. Dr. Stephen Belenko, who's a professor at Temple University, Department of Criminal Justice. Dr. Kathy Berlew, professor emeritus at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Wesley Clark, who's the dean's executive and professor at Santa Clara University. Dr. John Mayer, professor at Harry S. Truman College. Dr. Doug Polson, who is a program director at the Public Health Institute's Behavioral Health and Recovery Studies. Dr. Sharon Reif is a professor at Brandeis University at the Heller School of Social Policy and Management, and Dr. James Sorensen, who's a professor emeritus at the University of California, San Francisco, Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. So as you can see, we're working with a distinguished group of advisors who are helping us to make this project successful and to expand and provide an infrastructure for the recovery research field. Thank you. Next slide, please.
That was really great, Carmen. I have to fangirl a little bit over our advisory board. I'm just so impressed by the experience that they bring to the table. And we've kind of sorted them out on different slides, but so many of them wear lots of different hats that it's really hard to decide kind of where to put people. But we do have a lot of diverse interests represented and a wealth of experience. And I couldn't be more pleased by the support and guidance that we have from our advisory board on this project. So to turn the page a little bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about the training component. So as Carmen and Diane mentioned, one of the components of the I-STARR project is the webinar series. And this is the first in our webinar series, and we're using it to serve as an introduction to the I-STARR project and activities. So we'll have webinars throughout the duration of the I-STARR project. However, embedded within the webinar component is a year-long training series with specific training tracks for recovery residence operators or providers, as well as investigators who are new to the field or new to conducting recovery housing research. So the monthly trainings will start in June. Some of these trainings will be germane to both recovery housing providers and researchers, as well as to all stakeholders. And we call these our all audience webinars, and we'll have 3 of those. The all audience webinars and the trainings for recovery housing operators or providers will be held on the first Tuesday of the month from 2 to 3 if you're on the East Coast, and from 11 to 12 if you're on the West Coast. The trainings for researchers will be held on the 3rd Tuesday of the month and in that same time slot, from 2 to 3 if you're on the East Coast, and from 11 to 12 if you're on the West Coast. As Diane mentioned, information about these webinars and how to register for them will be on the I-STARR website and also noted in the I-STARR newsletter. So folks can register for any and all of the webinars, but we're also developing registration for folks who are interested in signing up for all webinars in either the provider or the researcher series, those tracks, all at once. And we're hoping that researchers and providers who sign up for these will attend all 12 of them in the series. But we know that due to scheduling difficulties or conflicts, or maybe finding out about the webinar series or the training tracks before they started, folks won't be able to see them all live. So all the webinars will be recorded and posted on the I-STARR website. For folks who've registered for the entire series, kind of all at once, they'll also have access to the webinars through the intranet that Diane mentioned, and can view the webinars there. But also in that the intranet space, they'll be able to interact with the I-STARR team members around the webinars, because we'll have someone monitoring questions and feedback about the content delivered in the webinars in that intranet space. We're also working to get trainings for the recovery residence operators, that training series credentialed, so that we can offer CEUs to those who attend all 12. But for both providers and researchers, we also want to provide a certificate for those who do attend all 12 webinars in their respective tracks. And we'd also offer to list their names on our website as completing those training series, because we're hoping that we can, through the I-STARR project, foster connections between researchers and recovery residence operators. Next slide, please. So that's a little bit about the mechanics of the trainings, but what will these trainings cover? So as I mentioned earlier, some of these trainings will be germane to both recovery housing providers and researchers, as well as to other stakeholders. And again, these are our all audience webinars. The first of these all audience webinars will review the recovery housing landscape and obstacles to conducting research on recovery housing. I liked Dr. Reef's mention in the video about just getting a sense of the lay of the land. That's what we're hoping to do in that webinar. It will serve as a grounding to ensure that all webinar participants are starting from the same place regarding recovery housing basics and the state of the field. And that webinar will be held in June. So the second all audience webinar will be held in November, and this will serve a similar purpose regarding the topic of opioid addiction and medications used to treat it. Basically, it will review key challenges to supporting residents on MOUD in recovery housing, as well as that basic information about what the medications are and how they're used. So the third of these all audience webinars will be taking place actually next year in May of 2024, so mark your calendars. And that will be the last of the operator and researcher trainings. This will review key challenges discussed in each of the tracks, the training tracks, and present suggestions on how to move research forward on MOUD and recovery housing. So because individuals in the provider and the researcher training series will be encouraged to develop questions for one another, we're really hoping that that webinar will serve to stimulate conversations between these two stakeholder groups to, again, foster and facilitate the best possible research on the topic. So these all audience webinars will be held the first Tuesday of the month. It's a familiar time slot, 2 to 3 on the East Coast and 11 to 12 on the West Coast. And again, the first one will be in June, the second one in November, and the final one in May of next year. So what will be covered in the trainings for recovery housing providers? And by this, we're referring to operators, owners, house managers, but also residents with or senior residents with operational responsibilities within the house. So 5 of these webinars will be focused on topics related to operations and management of recovery residences. So these webinars will be developed and presented by representatives of the National Alliance for Recovery Residences, or NAR, which has developed the most commonly referenced national standard for the operations of recovery residences. The housing standard developed by NAR contains guidelines for different types of recovery residences, providing different levels of care. And these nuances will be reflected in information that's provided in the webinars to ensure that it's generalizable to diverse audiences of providers. The 4 remaining webinars in the Recovery Housing Provider series will focus specifically on the challenges that operators face with respect to MOUD in different types of recovery residences. And we're working with Jason Howell from Recovery People to develop the trainings in this segment of the series. These webinars will review issues raised and changes that providers may need to consider when accepting residents on MOUD, issues that need to be considered with respect to specific resident screening policies and procedures, strategies residences can implement to mitigate diversion risk and create a safe and supportive environment, and examples of programs where providers and prescribers have learned to work more collaboratively, more closely with one another to support folks on MOUD in recovery housing. So the provider and operator webinars are held the first Tuesday of the month, except for July, because it falls on the 4th of July, then it will be the second Tuesday of the month. And again, in the same time slot, from 2 to 3 on the East Coast and from 11 to 12 on the West Coast. And finally, what about the researcher-specific webinars? So these are largely methods-based, and the topics for these webinars stem largely from a paper that I worked on with Doug Polson and Jason's team, where we reviewed some of the key challenges and rewards of conducting recovery housing research. The first of these webinars will serve as a general primer on experimental and quasi-experimental designs and review the advantages and challenges involved in each regarding recovery housing research. The next 4 webinars will focus on identifying, recruiting, and collaborating with recovery residence providers, as well as recruitment and tracking of recovery home residents. The next 2 webinars will focus on data collection and measurement, first tackling the advantages and disadvantages of mixed methods approaches, and then reviewing theories about recovery housing mechanisms of action and measurement of key constructs, including outcomes. The following 2 webinars will focus on statistical techniques germane to recovery housing research, one on the basics of multi-level modeling and the other on strengthening causal inference through the use of propensity score matching techniques. And although the researcher webinars are topically oriented and will be led by folks with specific expertise on that topic area for the webinar, all will also have presenters who can provide examples of using different designs or methodological techniques in recovery housing research. So the researcher webinars are held the 3rd Tuesday of the month, and the same time slots, 2 to 3 on the East Coast and 11 to 12 on the West Coast. And again, these will start in July. Next slide, please. So the topic and schedule for all webinars, including those in the training series, can be found on the I-STARR website. On this slide, I've listed the dates and topics for the webinars from June through the end of the year. But again, a more complete description of these trainings can be found on the I-STARR website. So that's a little bit about the training component. I now want to turn things over to Dr. Sarah Zemore, who will talk about the pilot study component. Next slide, please.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many folks here. So I'm Sarah Zemore. I am co-investigator on the I-STARR project, and I'm also co-leading with Amy the pilots program. So as you're getting a sense of fundamentally the I-STARR project is attempting to spur and support new studies, exciting new studies on how recovery residences function and how they might best function for people using MOUD. So the pilot program is designed itself to support, provide financial support for and training experiences for new studies in this area. So the program will support at least 5, typically 1-year pilot studies for new investigators studying recovery housing for those using MOUD. So our total pilot funding is about $270,000 over 3 years. And each project will average about $40,000 or $50,000. Pilot funding is designed to scaffold the development of skills and experiences important to submitting an NIHR mechanism grant. So actually the format of the application is very similar to an NIH grant. And applicants are asked to detail how their pilot studies will then support an R mechanism grant. And so they're asked to say something about what that grant will look like as well. So we've developed some topic areas, so 6 topic areas that are deeply informed by discussion with our advisory panel, which you all have learned about already here. So, you know, the advisory panel emphasized that work in this area is really in its very initial phases. So we need some of the basic work, such as studies looking at the prevalence of accessing recovery housing for people who use MOUD and gaps in utilization. We also need work on barriers to and facilitators of accessing recovery housing among people who use MOUD. Outcomes associated with accessing recovery housing for this population and factors affecting such outcomes, factors associated with MOUD adherence among residents, strategies for overcoming provider level barriers to supporting residents, and then disparities related to accessing and benefiting from recovery residences among people who use MOUD. Sorry about that, last bullet got cut off, but we're just, you know, get the point that we're interested in disparities as well. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so we have already tentatively approved 1 pilot project, which was written into the original grant proposal. And that is moving forward and will likely be initiated in May or June of 2023. That's this year. But then each year we're going to release an additional RFA for more pilots. In fact, we might accelerate that schedule since we started a little bit late. Actually, there's going to be another RFA released in 2023 this year in the around October. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But NIH new investigators are eligible, as is often the case with pilot programs, but I also want to emphasize that established investigators are also eligible as long as they are new to recovery research. So that is research on recovery residences. So that's kind of a unique feature here. So, you know, quite a lot of people can apply for these funds. We do encourage applicants to capture the perspectives of residents and address the needs of minority health populations or disadvantaged populations, and collaborate with recovery housing providers who have participated in the webinar series to serve as recruitment sites and/or community partners. So it's a 2-stage process. Applicants submit a letter of intent, and if they're approved, a full application for review by the pilots committee. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, this is just some key dates. We have actually already released our RFA, our first RFA, since that was in March, and received a batch of letters of intent, and we actually got a very nice response to our first RFA. And have made some decisions on those and requested full applications from some among that batch. Yes, we're proceeding to ask for full applications for some of those folks, and we'll get full applications in June. What's most relevant to all of you is that, again, we will be releasing another RFA around October of this year. So please keep your eyes out for that. Folks that already submitted an LOI, but we're not asked for a full application can resubmit as well. So there will be continuing opportunities to learn and to revise. You can check out our website for more. And then, you know, I'm happy to talk with anyone about, you know, their their study ideas. And I think Amy is as well. So, and then Adrian is available to answer any administrative questions, but please do reach out to us. It's a great idea to talk with us first if you have a study idea, and certainly you need to connect with your proposed mentor before you move forward with the LOI. But we do welcome applications and questions. Okay, next slide.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. I do want to underscore the piece about the application process where folks would identify someone from the team to serve as a mentor on the pilot study. It's a really important way for us to continue training people in research on recovery housing, because we do have folks who've conducted this work who know about MOUD and treatments for MOUD or opioid use disorder. We really do want people to reach out to us if they're interested in working on a pilot study. Now I'm going to turn things over to Adrian and our communications team to talk about upcoming I-STARR activities and how to stay in touch with the I-STARR project.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adrienne Faxio. I'm the project coordinator on I-STARR, and just want to alert you to some important dates, upcoming dates. As it was mentioned, as of yesterday, April 3rd, letters of intent for the pilot studies were reviewed and approved. And on May 15th, that's the anticipated start date for the first pilot study that's been approved. And then June 1st, we'll be sending out our I-STARR newsletter, which is a quarterly newsletter. So look out for that. And then June 2nd, full applications are due for the LOIs that were approved. And then June 6th will be the first training of the series that will be for both operators, providers, and researchers. And we urge you to register for that now. I dropped in the chat a link to the webinar page on our website where there's lots of information about all the upcoming trainings, and you can register for them there. And then June 19th, pilot study decisions will be sent out. Also, we encourage you to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and also on our study website, where you can find all our ongoing activities and be kept up to date there. I'm going to drop those all in the chat so it's easy for you to access. That's it for the update so far. I think we may want to turn it over to see if you guys have any questions for us.
Yeah, so feel free to advance to the next slide, or you can pause here for folks to see the social media links. I hope that we've covered everything that folks are wanting to hear about the I-STARR project, but it does look like we have time for questions and for some discussion. So folks are welcome to raise their hands if they want to pose a question to folks on the I-STARR team, or you can put your questions in the chat. Diane, were there any things that folks noted in the chat about wanting to learn about the I-STARR project that we didn't cover?
Nothing that we didn't cover. Just earlier, someone had mentioned, yes, that they wanted to be able to better support their residents. And I think that was it in terms of questions or in terms of what people wanted to learn at this webinar. But yeah, if anyone had any questions, please raise your hand or drop it into the chat.
Diane, there was one question about whether we'll be sharing these slides with people.
So the videos will be posted on the website, and the slides will be contained in the video.
I'm not sure you can see my hand raised with my things happening in the background, but anyway, my hand is raised. Hi, everybody. I'm Tasha Mendoza. I am an associate professor at the School of Social Work at Arizona State University, and I'm also the principal investigator of our state opioid response. And a lot of our grant funding is devoted to the recovery resident space. And so we're doing work there on Project Matters. It's called Medication and Treatment Technical Assistance for Recovery Residences. So we've done a lot over the past year in terms of developing products and training materials for our recovery residence owners and peer support specialists. And so we're really, really excited about the work that you're doing. I don't have a question. Mostly, I just wanted to introduce myself and just share a great deal of gratitude for the work that you're doing in Arizona. And I know that we have some folks in Arizona. I saw them in the chat there. It's a bit like the Wild Wild West still when it comes to recovery homes over here. In terms of licensure and how that gets managed from location to location. It's different from state to city to county. And it's just, there's just so much work to be done in this space. And I think that we are not even scratching the surface of what needs to happen. And we're just really happy and honored to be a part of it. And we're so glad that you put this together because it's really, really going to be helpful to our team and understanding how we can contribute to the knowledge base and the growth and enhancement of services in Arizona. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Natasha. I'm so glad that someone from the Opioid Response Network was on this call because, yeah, the Opioid Response Network has done amazing work. And we're, we're excited to collaborate, and see these two pieces really fitting together. You guys have done a lot of work, especially in the recovery housing space. And, we're hoping that we can come in and, also elevate the research aspect and really kind of open up the field in a lot of different ways that, we couldn't without working with one another. So thank you for being here. Other folks have questions? What about team members or advisory board members? Anything that we left out in terms of describing components of the I-STARR project or its potential impact on the field?
I wanted to say there's no cost for participating in the training, so it's a good value. No money up front, but the potential to receive continuing education units and to learn more about research in this space and improve the delivery of services and recovery housing settings for operators and providers. So I think there's something here for everyone.
And I just wanted to comment that it's great to see so many people from all over the country who are committed to this issue and want to move the field forward. Thank everybody for participating in this and the upcoming programs.
And that was Lenny Jason. I don't think he identified himself. Who's one of our co-investigators, and you saw him.
I know, a star in our video.
A star, exactly.
Well, we will certainly hang out until the top of the hour. But if folks wanted to sign off early, we can do that as well. Thank you everyone for being here and for being excited about this topic, for wanting to hear more about the I-STARR project. And we hope that you continue to be involved in the I-STARR webinar series, that you've signed up for the newsletter, and that you spread the word. It was really heartening to hear or to see in the poll that we did that most people heard about this webinar from colleagues. So we are building a network out there, and thank you for being a part of it. Anything else, Carmen, before we sign off?
I just wanted to acknowledge that we are, working not only with fantastic advisory board members, but also other organizations, our partners at the Pacific Southwest ATTC and others who are involved in this project. We couldn't do it without their support.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and stay tuned for more news from the I-STARR project.